The collect this morning says this: O God, that with you as our ruler and guide, we may so pass through things temporal that we lose not the things eternal. It's that losing the things eternal that I want us to think about this morning as we pass through things temporal. A number of years ago, and my old friend Skip Hutton will remember this, back in the late 80s, a friend of mine, Vince, who will remember this because he's sitting in the congregation, got me into big trouble. He sent a reporter to talk with me about men's souls. I had recently been to some national men's retreats run by the poet Robert Bly and the mythologist Michael Meade. My friend Vince thought the reporter might wish to talk with me about an article she was writing entitled, "What Men Really Want." Sitting in my office with a quiet young woman from a now defunct newspaper, Portfolio magazine, I found myself sharing a bit of my own soul and my life's journey through the lenses of what I had learned in the conferences I had attended. When the article came out, it was pretty bad. It was terribly written. It construed things I said, but something must have come through, because when I got home the evening of the day it hit the stands, I had 140 phone messages on my answering machine, all from men, all saying that somehow my story spoke to their experience and their struggles, and what could they do next? When you get 140 phone calls, you know you have a responsibility. So I responded. I called a friend of mine who ran a Catholic bookstore and had a meeting space. She gave me the space, and I called all the men back, and I divided them into 3 groups. And so we began an interesting journey together. We would meet once a week, and the agenda was simple. We told our stories to one another in a safe, supportive, non-critical environment. The first few meetings, I was really struck by the accomplishments of most of the men. These were not men who were simply struggling through life. I would say about 90% were highly successful professional men, attorneys, doctors, a dean of a business school. They were also old and young, white collar, and there were blue collar. One, a respected physician, brought his adult son. The oldest was 80 and the youngest 19. Most were straight men, but there were a few gay members as well, but I don't remember who was straight and who was gay because it really didn't matter. What mattered was that men were able to speak from the heart of their struggles and fears, the dryness, the wounds, the yearning for what brings them joy, spirituality, and life's meaning. And it was amazing to me to see the friendships and support that emerged. In fact, one of these groups, I understand, still meets weekly 25 years later. Why were such successful men still feeling empty inside? Why were they lonely? Why, when they had so many friends, they didn't feel the friendships crack the surface? Of all the stories shared, one stands out. It came from an Episcopal priest, a very successful rector, who was on track to become a bishop. I am not, by the way, sharing my story there incognito. This was really another rector. He presented a tough, stoic sort of persona. But one evening, as we were sharing with each other what we were passionate about, he spoke up. Honestly, he said, I'm not real passionate about the church. At least that's not my first passion. Oh, I like what I'm doing. And he then went on to talk about what he was passionate about his love of music, his love of history, his love of solitude and silence. And as he did, he began to weep. In a lecture entitled The Devil's Trick, Anne Belford Ulinoff says that the devil's trick is to make us turn away from what is truly heavenly and life-giving in ourselves and our lives in favor of a heaven that is a false utopia of security, success, and power. We can get tricked by the devil as individuals and also as organizations. An organization or even a church can give up the good it can really do well and loves doing in favor of a heavenly utopia of being bigger or better. As Jim Collins has written of great organizations that fail mysteriously. Recounting several of Jesus' parables in his 13th chapter, Matthew points to heaven, the authentic heaven we know and experience when we give ourselves over to God's Spirit to be our ruler and guide, as the collect says. When God's Spirit, which is that third thing between all the choices we have and all the stuckness we get into and all the emptiness we feel in the midst of success, when we turn to the Spirit who enlivens our souls and we listen deeply, we find small, easily dismissed or thrown out bits of heaven because we mistake them for weeds in the garden of our life, or a rotten rather than a good fish in the net we pull up out of our lives and our yearnings. The devil's trick is to cause us to look with disdain or disgust or embarrassment upon what is most precious to us, so that we disown it. The devil's trick with churches is to look for what is biggest, grandest, most successful. And there's nothing more boring than a clergy conference when clergy are bringing out their successes and never sharing their anxieties. Those images of heaven, and in so doing, churches neglect their own quiet goodness. The devil tried to trick Jesus in the wilderness with images of being really effective. That's what we want, effectiveness as a Messiah, the way of Caesar, to bring a heaven of healing, of food for the hungry, and power without suffering. Good things. Instead, Jesus opted for a way that endures, God's quiet way, person by person, one by one, encounter by encounter, building community where together we can allow ourselves to be penetrated by the Spirit, for our souls to come alive, and for us to discover that heaven is truly already here. Heaven not as a utopia won by powerful and great forces, but heaven as a community of love, of hope and healing and vulnerability, a community of the Spirit that, like a pinch of leaven or a tiny seed, can endure and bring what we need in the end. Amen.